our expert panel. As I mentioned, my name is Jaigris Hodson, and I'm the Canada Research Chair in Digital Communication for the Public Interest at Royal Roads University in Victoria, BC. Anatoliy Gruzd is a professor at the Ted Rogers School of Management at Toronto Metropolitan University and co-director of the Social Media Lab. He specializes in analyzing online communities and social networks, as well as creating novel computational techniques and tools for examining public discourse on social media. And his innovative approach to studying social media has led him to be named a Canada Research Chair in 2015, and this was renewed in 2020. And he's been inducted to the Royal Society of Canada College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists, and I am honored to call Anatoliy a colleague and a friend. Dr. Chris Tenove is the acting director of the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions at UBC, the University of British Columbia. He's a researcher instructor at the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs, and he has published peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on the challenges that digital media pose to democracy and human rights, focusing on topics such as electoral disinformation, online harassment of politicians, and social media regulation. His brilliant work really shows the overlap between the harassment that we cover today and other bigger problems like dis and misinformation. And finally, last but not least, Dr. Victoria O'Meara is a postdoctoral researcher at Royal Roads University in the College of Interdisciplinary Studies. Her research examines shifting norms of media and cultural production in the era of platformization and how emergent technologies rely or reshape inequalities across gender, race, and class. A brilliant emerging scholar. Thank you for joining us. So before we get into our expert panel presentations, I just wanted to provide a couple quick definitions because we are using these three terms quite a bit in this presentation. Online antisocial behavior is the big, broad term that can refer to online harassment and abuse, but also can refer to, nuisance behaviors online, like distributed denial of service attacks, which is when somebody creates a bunch of bots to spam a website and make it, not work. Online abuse is under that umbrella, and it includes harassment, but online abuse is quite serious, and it speaks to people's civil rights, their right to exist free from attacks from other people. And it can include attacks that also move offline but begin online. So for example, if somebody publishes your address online and then comes and finds you or puts you in physical danger. And then finally, online harassment is nestled under both antisocial behavior and online abuse. Harassment is a bit, in the eye of the beholder in some sense, because harassment is whatever somebody feels is distressing targeted at them. And this is where we do have to exercise that sensitivity, because just because I don't find something distressing doesn't mean somebody else might not find it distressing. And so if somebody finds something distressing and they feel that they are being attacked, that's when it falls under the term online harassment. So, broadly, we can often use these terms interchangeably, and they often are used interchangeably, but that gives us some nuance to these various terms. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Anatoliy Gruzd, who will walk us through the state of antisocial behavior on social media. Dr. Gruzd, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Just a quick notice. Some examples we're going to show will include some, hateful language and offensive language, just as a heads up. But it comes with, with the territory. This is the nature of this topic. I also was told that I only have 5 minutes to make sure we have time for our breakout group discussions. Otherwise, I'll be deplatformed from here if I go over 5 minutes. So I will go through slides, some of the slides very fast, but you do have a link. So Esteban, our technical moderator, kindly shared the link to our slides today. So feel free to check out some of the links and additional resources. So it's not probably come as a surprise to you that we kind of been inundated with the messages, insulting, hateful messages like the ones on the screen. Unfortunately, it's becoming more and more normalized. And today we want to, but that's our individual experiences. We also want to get a sense of what's the scale of the problem. And so we turn to some of the survey data that can indicate the extent to which different publics are being harassed online. Based on Pew Research Center in the US, about 41% of Americans experience personally online harassment, and that percentage has been on the rise. Then we look at globally, based on the World Wide Web Foundation survey that specifically surveyed young adults. So we see similar percentages, even slightly higher, that about half of them experience online abuse. And so those who did experience it reported 68% of them, majority experienced it on social media specifically. So social media being one of those places where it happens. So what's happening in Canada? This year, we've conducted a survey, nationally representative survey across Canada, and we asked 1,500 Canadians, have you experienced antisocial behavior? To what extent, how often, what types? About a quarter of participants said they have experienced it sometimes or more often. And certainly the percentage is higher if we include also, people who rarely experience at least once. But at least we know that about 1/3 of us are being experiencing that sometimes or more often. Then we dive deeper to look at what types of antisocial behavior Canadians are experiencing. And the most common one is being purposely excluded from a conversation. That was a bit of a surprise for us, followed by receiving hurtful messages. This is kind of more general category that we did expect. And 10% of Canadians reported receiving or having sexual content sent to them via social media from somebody who was trying to be mean to them or trying to embarrass. So that's a bit more hurtful content that very damaging. And as Jaigris briefly mentioned earlier, it's the minority groups are disproportionately more likely to experience antisocial behavior. 42% of racialized individuals, 47% of individuals with disabilities, and half of individuals who members to us LGBTQ+ community reported experiencing it. And it's not just experiencing antisocial behavior, what stays online doesn't live it. Well, actually, it has a physical, emotional impact on the individuals. So they reported experiencing mental and emotional stress as a result of it. So this is on the individual side, the reported data. But what platforms are actually doing to address this issue? So we can turn to some of the policy statements that community standards that platforms have developed over the years. Looking at X, formerly Twitter, telling what types of messages they take action on. And by taking action on, it can be a range of activities from shadow banning somebody, meaning that they are posts will not appear in recommendations or results, to suspending the account temporarily or permanently, to disabling certain individual messages but keeping the account active. So what caused those actions to be taken by the platform according to the policy? Targeted harassment, encouraging or calling for others to harass an individual, unwanted sexual content and graphic objectification, insults, violent event denial. So this is in their policy. But unfortunately, it's nicely written across many platforms, but the enforcement actions are not consistent and sometimes not very transparent. And the review process takes very long time. So we've been encouraged by platforms to report certain actions, inappropriate actions that goes against community standards, but quite often we are being discouraged by not hearing back on what actually happened when we do so. And in part, so if we can continue, Jaigris, on the next. In part, I think this is new addition. I've been following this policy that appeared in X platform, where people ask, do I need to be the target of the content that I've been reported, that I report? And so what explanation the platform provides that kind of can reveal why sometimes the action is not taken. So essentially, if you report and you not target, the platform may say, well, it's your experience, but we need to get in touch with the person being targeted to ensure that we have necessary information, as they say here, prior taking any enforcement action. But sometimes the person being targeted doesn't want actually to speak more about it or comment on it. So it's kind of sad to see that in the policies. But we can continue on the next slide. What else platform doing? So other than policies, platforms like Meta has been reporting, producing these transparency reports, which kind of gives us a general idea of the volume of the data, not necessarily the percentage of this problematic content versus the overall content. And here's why I say that. So the chart you see directly from Facebook page, showing how many posts they took action on because they were categorized as bullying or harassment. So you can see there's a huge jump in the number of posts they took action on around later 2020, and that's the US election. A lot of content was politically motivated, but the numbers are in millions. So it sounds like a lot. But in fact, because we know there are billions of messages and even more interactions, percentage-wise, it might not be a huge number they take action on. But what is more interesting, the next slide reveals, is that what's the percentage of messages they did take action on for bullying and harassment were automatically identified before those messages reached their audience, their targets, versus those messages that required users to report them. And so you can see there was improvement, again, around the same time of automatic detection of these messages. Meta reports 65 of them were caught by the algorithms, but still 35%, about 35 require user reporting. And that's a substantial percentage, I should say. So this is just a brief, light speed overview of the state of antisocial behavior worldwide as reported by users, and then quick look at what policies, content moderation, community safety policies are saying and what they are not doing necessarily. And now over to Chris, who will take us over through his slides. Thank you.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you, Anatoly. And I'm going to shift now from Anatoly looking at broader publics to focus on a particular group that is facing online abuse and antisocial behavior, and that's health communicators. And so I've been doing work on online abuse and disinformation targeting a range of public figures. This research on health communicators in Canada is more recent, and I'm happy to have Jaigris helping me in that project. And so some of the insights I just want to talk about here are drawing on interviews with about 60 interviews and workshops with over 60 health communicators in Canada. Everyone we've spoken to says that the amount of online abuse and antisocial behavior that they've been facing as a health communicator has gotten worse. Why is that? I just want to actually go back and say, by health communicators, we're talking about public health officials, health experts who are in the news and who are active online, and health journalists who are also dealing with, in particular, the COVID-19 pandemic. So, but why were they facing more online abuse and antisocial behavior? There were some broader society-wide factors, including increased internet use and also just the real hardship of the pandemic, which was causing a whole range of stressors and leading to greater social polarization. But then health communicators in particular had some factors that they felt were leading to them facing more online abuse and antisocial behavior. One is just the amount of attention they were getting, much more often in the spotlight, more on mainstream media, and this was a good thing, much more active online, trying to engage publics and inform them. Second, an important part is they were often getting blamed for things that were going wrong, and people had very different views about what was going wrong. So public health officials in particular were being seen as promoting policies that were either too lax or too strict or done the wrong way or done at the wrong time. And so a lot of people's grievances about their experiences were being kind of targeted at them. And some of this was kind of bubbling up, but sometimes it was intentionally directed political politicization of the expertise and the public health recommendations and so forth. So we had actors both domestically within Canada and internationally that were fomenting this politicization of that work. There's a lot of different forms of online abuse and antisocial behavior people were facing. And so we find it helpful to highlight 4 categories. One is the threats or wishes of violent harm. In some cases, these were pretty explicit, particularly at, again, public health officials, the most prominent ones, probably if you're in Canada, people who you've seen in the news. Often, though, they were ambiguous. And so these are vague comments about you're going to get what you deserve, or one day you'll face trial for this. Not infrequently, there were references to the Nuremberg trials at the end of World War II, which for those convicted ended in hangings. And so depending on how people interpreted this, that could be very threatening language. But in a lot of cases, it is difficult to assess the safety risks that are related to some of this more threatening language, both for health communicators, but even for police or security when they go to them. Second, some health communicators face racism, misogyny, or other identity-targeted discriminatory or hateful language. This is in part, again, due to some of the dynamics of the broader context of the pandemic, and we certainly saw anti-Asian and sometimes anti-Semitic hate more broadly, but also coming to bear on the health communicators. Here too, sometimes this is ambiguous and coded, sometimes very explicit. A third area has to do with some of the conspiracy theories about the pandemic and public health responses to it. And this included, messaging at health communicators that would accuse them of being part of more broad, shadowy plots, facing really explicit types of, or participating in really corrupt practices and payoffs that didn't exist. And sometimes that they were participating in, intentional campaigns of genocide or harm. This is not just a kind of concern about truth, but also by labeling people with participating in such problematic behavior they felt was putting them kind of at risk, and both reputationally, but perhaps even in terms of safety. And then a fourth category, maybe more of a gray area, was around accusations of incompetence, attacks on what people were doing or saying. And here I say gray area because there can be real debate about what's going over the line and what isn't. I should also add, our interviewees were very clear that these kind of accusations were coming from both sides, meaning those who felt that the public health measures, the vaccine approaches, or others that they were pushing or advocating for, that they were going too far in the strictness of those measures or not far enough. So there's a lot of this kind of accusations of incompetence and error. So what are the consequences of this? I'll highlight 4 areas again here. One is this additional threat around security or sense of security, and we can talk later perhaps about the links there between what's happening online and offline risks. Almost all the health communicators that I interviewed described the psychological toll of being targeted with messages and communication like this. And we also know from other research that again, those who are belonging to more marginalized or underrepresented groups tend to have more negative consequences, including in the mental health side, from this kind of behavior. A third area was a concern about professional harm. Would these kind of accusations about them be believed? Would being targeted by really extreme language online make it more difficult for them to engage with a patient or get employed in the future? And here we found those who were a bit more precariously employed or more contract workers had a lot more worries that this was going to have, being the targeted of this kind of stuff might have impacts on their professional stability. And then last has to do with the impact on their ability to communicate, both individually, the emotional toll, the time it took to process this and manage it, and also the broader context in which they're working and trying to get their messages across in what was felt to be often a toxic, polarized, polluted online information landscape. And so I'll end there and turn it over to Victoria.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm going to start a timer for myself so that I can keep us on track here. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. Thank you for being here. My name is Victoria O'Mara, and I'm going to present on some work I'm doing in collaboration with Dr. Hodson about online abuse and public scholarship more generally. Jaigris, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Great. And as Chris has highlighted some of the personal, emotional, and mental health impacts of online abuse, I'll stick to some of the professional and societal that we have come across in our own work. And to begin, I would highlight that one of the key professional impacts that experiences of online abuse have that we've seen in our own work is that it can hugely impact research topic choices and research trajectories. So it can cause people to decide that they need to switch their focus to another area, which can impact their future research agenda and have professional consequences for them, of course, but also to affect the broader research communities that they belong to and the capacity to generate knowledge in that field. Secondly, it functions to chill participation in online discussion, as well as people's willingness to engage in public scholarship. And again, as we likely all know in this room, these are important professional norms to be engaged in, to say, develop relationships with potential research collaborators, or be contacted for media interviews or other things that are important for one's professional development to develop that reputation as an expert in your field. And so online abuse can really distract people, discourage people from engaging in those kinds of activities. And finally, we found that often experiences of online abuse are actually explicitly targeted at sabotaging someone's professional reputation. So that might come in the form of spreading lies or rumors about a researcher online, but also contacting their institution to file false claims about them. So those are some of the professional impacts. Beyond that, there are wider societal impacts of online abuse that we should all be concerned about. For one, it curbs the circulation of research and the impact that that research can eventually have and where it can be taken up in different communities. It curbs willingness to challenge the status quo, and by that I mean it curbs our willingness to be imaginative and creative and think radically in terms of the solutions that we'll propose to social issues. And perhaps most importantly, it constrains the plurality of voices that we have in different fields. As my colleagues here have noted, it is often women, people of color, other marginalized communities that are most frequently targeted and carry the biggest burden of online abuse. And that is, robbing us all of the contributions of those voices in that type of research. So if we can go to the next slide. So we've also been looking at how people have been coping with online abuse. And unfortunately, it tends to be quite individualized and ad hoc from what we have been hearing from researchers. Many of the common responses to experiences of online abuse are going it alone. And by that, I mean, blocking harassers independently, not really reaching out to anyone. An experience of online abuse can be a very isolating experience because there's a lot of shame and embarrassment involved in having this experience. And so people can get quite insular and not reach out at all, which can be really damaging. Beyond that, there are, as I've mentioned, people tend to withdraw from public spaces and, resist doing public scholarship to protect themselves. Or they might turn to friends and family and close colleagues for support. Rarely what we're seeing is people attempt to engage their institution for help or turn to their institution for help. And in our work, we've identified sort of 3 key reasons why that might be. The first is fear, and this is the expectation that, or the worry that they might somehow be blamed or punished for the experience that they're having, or that this could somehow damage their image in their boss's eyes, and so they don't bring it to their institution for fear of what might happen. And in many ways, that's not an unfounded fear. There have been times when it has had damaging professional impacts to raise this with your institution, so that's fair enough in some ways. There's also a degree of skepticism, and here people have vocalized to us that, I don't really see what my institution could do, and so I don't see the point of bringing it to them. And then finally, we've identified uncertainty as a third barrier that stops people from bringing this to their institutions. And by that, it's uncertainty about what counts as online abuse or harassment, what is important enough to bring to your dean or department chair, and also uncertainty about what the chain of events will be that sets in motion. And so this uncertainty really discourages people as well from coming forward. So those are some of the key things that we have noticed around why people are not seeking out help. And I'll stop it there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So that sort of sets the scene. So for what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to go into a few breakout discussions. They're going to take about 25 minutes in your breakout groups. You're going to respond to one of two hypothetical scenarios, and we've put the slide link in the chat. So if you are following along, you want to click that link, you will be taken to detailed of the scenarios. So in each group, you will be assigned either scenario A or scenario B. You're going to talk about the scenario, and we also want you to think through a few additional questions. So what strategies do you think might be needed to support the target prior to, during, and following the event? What could the individual do? So the person experiencing that scenario. What should the community do? The organization. What about laws and policies? What do we need there? And we also want to know whether you yourself have encountered similar situations to this. We want to know if we've missed anything. What is not been captured here that you might want to address? And how would you prefer to be supported during or following a similar incident if it happened to you? I'm going to read through the scenarios, and then Esteban is going to put us into breakout groups. So scenario A is, you are the research director of a labor think tank. A researcher at your organization who immigrated from Nigeria recently published a report on wage discrimination for Black workers in Canada. You see on Twitter, X, that the researcher is being accused of bias and incompetence after a xenophobic influencer tagged them and told them to go back home if they don't like this country. So what could you do to help? And what policies do you think your organization should have in place before this happens? Now, scenario B is you're the communications manager for an agency that announced the results of a trial for a new COVID-19 vaccine. Senior staff have begun to receive emails accusing them of crimes against humanity. So this is sort of like some of the things Chris described. And their social media accounts are inundated with posts insulting them or attacking anyone who questions their research. The organization's address is included in many posts. So what would you do to help in this scenario? And what policies should your organization have to address a situation like this? Myself and Anatoliy will be in groups discussing scenario 1, and Chris and Victoria will be in groups discussing scenario B. Everyone. Okay, so I'm just going to, again, share my screen so that we can all remember what the scenario was that we were talking about. And so my group had a scenario A. And let me just bring up my notes here. Okay, so what would we do? And we talked about needing to work with faculty from the comms team to encourage them when to engage and when to not. We talked about the different ways that we could engage. For example, if you were witnessing this, the first question is, does your colleague know that they've been bashed on Twitter/X? And do you tell them? What else do? You can block on their behalf. You can report on their behalf. But it goes beyond that, because you need to also engage with the organization and let them know that they need to support this colleague and that you're behind this colleague. Also, when comms works with faculty, sometimes the faculty don't understand that it's as much for their protection and their own reputation as it is for the university's reputation. So, being clear about providing different levels of support, from maybe somebody like a dean all the way down to comms and maybe IT as well is very important. We brought up the idea of ResearchGate and altmetrics as driving maybe people to Twitter where they might see bad things about you. And so this is some unintended consequences of the different technologies that has been used in universities. Like one university eventually turned off ResearchGate for the entire university because they couldn't obviously control what was being said on Twitter and what was being collected and then shared unintentionally. So these are things I think that I certainly don't always think about, and other people don't always think about, or what are the mechanisms by which people could be targeted. And so it's not just Twitter. It could be, something that seems innocuous like ResearchGate. An important question came up, like, is how do you even get people to care? So how do you get the dean to care? How do you get the vice president of communication at your university to care? Some people feel like a lot of these individuals don't care, and so there's greater training involved. There's more education that needs to happen at all levels. But the part of that which is tricky is sometimes the response might be, well, then don't do risky research. So if you're educating, deans and above, they may tell you, well, don't do that. Just don't say that. And I know that Vicky and I in our work have heard faculty have been given that advice. Well, just don't say these things. But we need to highlight that, academic freedom means that the researchers should be able to research what they wanted and, share that knowledge with the public. But that's part of the education piece too. Now, our group also recommended support from the start, even before getting to these scenarios. And that could look like even a kit that you share with faculty before you communicate about their work if you're in a comms department. And I thought that was a really unique and important piece, is that maybe comms could work more closely with faculty before, sending out a press release or posting a video to YouTube, or even posting, a tweet or an Instagram post. And that would prepare faculty and maybe their departments so that they can be supported if something occurs. And we talked about needing to have a crisis management plan. So Anatoliy, did I miss anything? I'm getting
Spot
the thumbs
on.
up.
Great summary. And thank you everybody who joined a group discussion. I really learned a lot from you. Thank you.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Vicky to talk about their scenario B discussion.
Thank you very much. Yes, it does sound like a very generative conversation. We as well had a very generative conversation, and fortunately have some communications professionals in the room. So some really useful strategies were shared. Our conversation highlighted in particular the importance of pre-planning for this sort of scenario. So before this has even transpired as an event, what are the procedures that are in place already? And so in our conversation, that meant that communications departments should have a crisis communication plan for such things, that these things should be well established prior to, that this should not be the sort of scenario where we're flying by the seat of our pants and trying to work out what it is that we should be doing. We also highlighted the importance of assistance in monitoring, and this is perhaps something that a communications department can do, perhaps something that IT could potentially help with, monitoring different social medias, to, perhaps help with setting up filters, blocking incoming messages, those sorts of things. These are all things that can help the individual faculty member when they're going through a crisis, but perhaps this isn't technical skills that you immediately have. And so being able to talk to those people ahead of time, if you're going to publish something that maybe might cause a reaction, this can be really helpful, or at least knowing who you need to reach out to in the event that you would need such support. There was conversation of, in the past, having been able to reach out to social media platforms to ask about the support that they can lend should an event transpire, but apparently less effective these days. So something to keep in mind if that's something that you would be inclined to an avenue you'd try. There was also raised in our group the importance of documenting, so the importance of recording the abuse as it's happening, and also, having someone to help do that, because again, being the person who all of the vitriol is directed at, it can be really traumatizing to have to go through and collect and make a record of all of these things. So, enlisting someone to be able to help with that is an important piece of responding to events of harassment. And another point that was brought up was the importance of support from people in positions of power, to perhaps that comes in the form of public messages of solidarity and support for your faculty, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's private messages of support, or accommodations if necessary, to say, you know, this, you don't have to be in these spaces if this is sort of an experience that you're going through. To know that the people who are, you know, in positions of power around you have your back, can be really helpful to navigate a situation like this. So administrators and deans need to step up in that way, and something that we should be advocating for. Those are some of the notes that I took, but I'm sure I'm missing things. Chris, do you want to step in, and is there anything that you remember from our conversation?
No, I mean, I have more just a general observation, which based on the research that I've been doing, including research on the online harassment and attacks on reputations of journalists globally, including in countries like Brazil and South Africa and Canada, is that there really is a big difference between the experience of people who are at a well-resourced, proactive institution that is capable of doing a whole bunch of things, and those who either do not have a supportive institution they're at, or who are more freelancer or independent of institutions. And so one of the real gaps I think that we all need to think about is, for those who don't have anywhere near the institutional backing, where can they go? What kind of associations or networks can exist, so that those who are trying to face these and just don't have the institutional support can find it. And that could be, a start is when we and other groups try and share best practices. And so we will be getting through some of those here, but also sharing resources that others have created at the end, so that even for those who don't have institutional comms folks who can help them with things, that at least you can start to get a sense of that knowledge base and take on some yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And I was really struck by hearing from our group that these scenarios weren't new. They weren't unusual. People had experienced or commented that they experienced many things that resonated here. So it just goes to show, all the stats show that this is increasing, and we're all in a place now where, yeah, we've experienced quite a bit of this, unfortunately. So with that in mind, we promised you, scenarios for addressing online abuse and some tips and tricks, and that's what we're going to end with today. So we're going to start with individual strategies, what you can do in your own life and with technology to protect yourself. And hopefully you can share this, with others in your networks as well. So Anatoliy, go ahead when you're ready.
Yes, well, it's great to have such an well-informed group here. So perhaps many of what we're going to tell you right now, it's not new necessarily, but sometimes it's good to have a general overview of things. And maybe you'll find something new as well. So let's go through individual strategies first, and then Victoria and Jaigris will talk about more institutional and organizational strategies. I like to start with the State of Antisocial Behavior survey that I mentioned earlier. And so the reason is that one of the questions we ask individuals is, what do they do when they've been targeted by antisocial behavior, such as online harassment? And so here I highlighted in this busy table the top five responses that individuals are engaged in. So the first thing, more popular response will be unfriend or block a person or account responsible. So of course, that's first perhaps yes, but it doesn't really remove the harassment, doesn't change the reputational damage, because the messages would still be there. But at least that's something that people can do right away to remove themselves from that situation. At the same time, if we go back, Jaigris, yeah. Are you telling me that I need to go faster? So at the same time, we also hear that it's important to document online harassment, and even if it's not done by individuals, so if some of it blocked or removed, then there may be no documented evidence for that. So keep that in mind. Of course, our respondents felt it's important to go and check their privacy settings to make sure that maybe their account, the messages are too public, and that don't have to be, at least at that moment. The third most common activity was to report that account, harassing account, to the group or community moderator. This is different from platform moderation. Perhaps, hopefully, if it happens within a particular group or community online, moderators are more responsible and responsive to your concerns. Number 4 was reporting the person responsible to the platform, but of course we know that it's probably unlikely that effective nowadays. And unfortunately, the last here in this top list was completely stopping withdrawing from online group or social media platform. But we also know for many of us who didn't, who wants to disseminate our research widely, engage with the public and other stakeholders, that may not be an option. So with this in mind, let's continue with the next slide. And this is, so thank you, Jaigris. So if you have the access to the slide, so everything is clickable. You actually can go to the state of the antisocial behavior online report and download it. So continue with this academic social media use, something that we haven't necessarily seen in our survey, but maybe more relevant for academics and others, is to make sure you not just change your privacy settings if you or somebody encountering antisocial behavior, but also check any third-party application that you authorize to access to your content. And so sometimes applications are being hacked, and so indirectly, somebody may get access to your account through those third-party applications. And usually, it's a good reminder to go under the settings, and these applications are listed usually in one of the places there. Sometimes it's better to use a dedicated social media account, especially if you're doing quote-unquote risky research. So this way, it's the institution being attacked, not necessarily you individually. So the rate of actions may be different than versus your personal account being attacked. Number 3, if it happens, reframe. And we talk now with discussion groups how sometimes, it's really impossible the person just to read some of these harassing messages. So you don't have to, refrain from reading them, maybe disable comments, and maybe ask another person to curate, moderate those space for you if you feel it's still important to be in that space. Let's continue. So quite often online harassment goes hand in hand with cybersecurity attacks. Hacking accounts I mentioned earlier, posting on your behalf. So it's also good in this context to kind of remind ourselves and review what are we doing to protect our data, our accounts, including social media accounts. You've heard probably many times from your IT personnel, this is just another reminder, try to use password management programs. Yes, they're not perfect. Yes, we've heard about LastPass was hacked or OnePass, but they're still better than keeping your passwords in those Excel spreadsheets. One of the advantages that you are notified if your account was leaked, not because of LastPass and OnePassword, but if another platform was hacked, and so it will notify you such and such account was leaked, and you can automatically change your password. Two-factor authentication, critical. We cannot rely on passwords, but at least you have that extra layer of protection. You've heard it. This is just another reminder. When we're dealing with collaborative work, we're sharing files and data sets like we did today. We shared slide deck with all of you because we trust you. But sometimes you just share too much and give edit permission to folders and files. Maybe at the time was appropriate, but then the person leaves your team, graduates, and maybe change their opinion about some of the things and can go back and maybe maliciously change content, remove the files. So it's a good practice, digital hygiene, to go back to see the shared folders you've gave in the cloud to former team members. Do they still need to have access of such? Because okay, we're going to continue on. And I think this is my last slide. This is specifically related to projects and researchers who host their own project-specific websites that perhaps outside of university domain name. So then they're kind of responsible for managing their cybersecurity aspects of it, because websites can and do often been hacked as well. And if somebody running a coordinated attack on you, on your team, on your research, your website is a fair game for them, and they're gonna attack those websites. They're gonna do the denial of service attack, so nobody can actually access your website. They may actually hijack your domain names. So a couple of things, and they actually may find out your home address through domain name registration. So first thing, if you do have your project website or even your professional website with your own domain name, check whether your hosting provider has the ability, most of them do now, to private to hide your personal information. So Namecheap, which is a Canadian domain host registrar, or Cloudflare, a popular international provider, they all have the option. So essentially what you see the screenshot here, if you go to Whois website right now and you have a domain name, type in, so my domain name is Gruzd, my last name.ca, and it will tell you when I registered the account, when it's due, due for renewal. But more importantly, when you scroll down, it will tell you that private information of my home address is redacted for privacy reasons, and that's critical. There's also option in your hosting provider to lock your name registration, so nobody can hijack, nobody can steal your domain name. And again, if your project or personal website, professional website hosted outside university domain, you're responsible to making sure you have all the patches installed and security plugins, and back up your website regularly. These happen, some of, all of it actually. All of these recommendations coming from my personal experience running various projects, including more recently COVID-19 related, misinformation related project. We had a domain website, we still have, and it was attacked. It was reported as a potentially malicious website. It wasn't, but so we had to go through all these checkboxes here, what I'm sharing from my personal experience. So have a backup copy if it's your website hacked. At least you can quickly restore it. And we do like, I'm not being paid by Cloudflare, but I like some of their features, how if you're hosting your website, it can be a buffer between your hosting provider and your website where all the traffic goes through them. And they have free features like bot flight mode, meaning that if they detect bots been attacking your website, they can prevent denial of service attack and other cool things. If certain countries who are on restricted list, not supposed to access your research projects, you can change those in settings in Cloudflare quite easily. So those are my tips and suggestions. And so essentially the main point here is that online, being in online spaces, when somebody being attacked directly via discursive means, it's more likely they're also going to be attacked, or their organization being attacked through other means, like through, the cyber attacks on the websites. So thank you. Over to Jaigris and Vicky.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm going to run through a few of the organizational and bystander strategies that we've, in conversation with faculty, have found that they're advocating for that would be useful. So go ahead, Jaigris, to the first slide. Thank you very much. So there was a series of organizational strategies that have been identified as potentially useful. And depending on who we have here, some of these might not be something that you have, the active capacity to implement at your own institutions, but these are potentially things that we can all be working towards advocating for at our various institutions. And then from here, I'll move into bystander things that we can do maybe more directly to support one another. So one thing that could really help to improve the situation for many faculty is more training. And that's training for faculty specifically, perhaps in using some of the cybersecurity measures that Anatoliy has laid out. That sort of training could be quite useful, or training about how to respond in an incident when you're being trolled, or how to lock down your social media, those sorts of things, definitely, but also training for managers, for administrators, so that they understand what online abuse is, how it's affecting their faculty, and what's a useful and supportive way to respond versus what are potentially unhelpful responses that do very little. So more training is something that has been mentioned to us again and again as a key here. Secondly, more funding. And this funding could come in the form of paying for some of the softwares or programs like data scrubbers to help people make themselves more secure online, but also in more severe instances, perhaps there's costs associated with having to relocate because someone has published your private address online and you want to spend a few days at a hotel or something in severe instances when you fear for your safety or the safety of your family, or funding for legal processes, or needing to take some time away because of the emotional toll. More money invested into solving this problem could go a long way towards alleviating some of the stress that's put on individual faculty or researchers. Thirdly, and incredibly importantly, is clear processes and instructions, ones that are known beforehand, but also that give people a clear idea of what it is that we need to do when this event happens. We are finding that most institutions are just now beginning to sort of develop their processes and protocols for when online abuse happens, and they're very, very, very much needed. And so getting on that now before a problem presents itself is so important to the mental health of the faculty and researchers, but also just to handling these things as smoothly as is humanly possible. And then finally, creating opportunities to discuss how online abuse is affecting faculty or researchers. Again, as I mentioned before, these can be really isolating and shame-filled experiences that people carry with them very independently. And so creating space for people to come together to talk about how this is affecting them and the experiences that they're having can be really helpful to faculty who are going through this, to know that they're not alone, to know that other people are confronting the same things. So that sense of solidarity and support. And also it's an opportunity for administrators or people in positions of power to reiterate their support for their faculty, which in many instances isn't done enough, that there's a silence on the behalf of administrators that's really quite damaging and quite additional stress for faculty. So now I'll move into some bystander strategies as well. So for those of us who are researchers and how can we help one another, these are really kind of material, very concrete ways that you might be able to provide support if you see instances of abuse going on. Private messages of support, a simple email to say, I see what's happening to you and I'm so sorry and this is not your fault, can go a really long way to help people feel less alone and less attacked. Public messages of support are also an option. I would stress here that this is something that really needs to be considered carefully. If it's safe for you to do so, it means a lot, certainly, but also this has to be taken into consideration against your own safety. And private messages of support are equally, powerful and helpful for the person under attack. Assistance documenting abuse, if you come across this happening, to reach out to someone and say, if you need help, like I'm happy to take over your social media for you right now to document what's going on, delete or report harassing behaviors, but also to make sure that you're getting the messages that you actually want to read, but so that you don't have to be sifting through the muck for right now. That's hugely important because, as we talked about in our group, it can be really painful to have to sift through these horrible messages to get the messages that you actually need to do your job. Help reporting accounts and identifying abusers. Again, this is a way that bystanders can really step in to offer help to people being attacked. And then finally, in a similar way, clearing out inboxes, taking over social media, voicemail, checking through those things so that the messages that they do want to receive are making their way to the target, but that they're not also inundated with horrible commentary while they're trying to still do their job. So those are some very concrete ways that we can begin to support one another when these attacks do happen. And all of these, I think, can be well summarized under the banner of sort of getting organized. And this is, I think, a useful sort of starting point for us to do that, is for us to begin to have these conversations and get organized together to create that infrastructure of support for one another. So I will stop there. We can go on to questions.
Yes, and we do have 7 minutes for any questions that you have. And of course, if you would like, we're going to send to everybody on this list the recording, so you can share it with those people in your organizations who you think would benefit from it. And we do intend to have future resources, webinars, and other items that we can share with you. So stay tuned for that as well. But I've put all of our emails here in the slides, and of course you have a copy of the slide deck yourself. So if you have specific questions that you don't feel comfortable raising today, or you want to reach out for other reasons, we invite more conversations so we can build that network that Victoria was talking about. But yeah, in the last few minutes, if you have questions for us, or would you like to have a broader, quick group discussion, we're here until 11:30 BC time. So I invite anybody to raise their hand if they have a question, or you can type into the chat. That works too.